You're under arrest for aggravated murder ×2, okay? Nobody's gonna ask you any questions. Nobody's gonna bother you. Can I have your key, please?
Could you please be careful taking this one off so it doesn't break the bracelet?
Newly released body cam video shows us the moment teen Mackenzie Shirilla was cuffed and arrested for the murder of her boyfriend and his friend. And even though she's told she's charged with 2 counts of murder, she seems most worried about her bracelet. We'll dive into this in a moment. You may remember this case, the story of a teenager in a relationship considered by many to be toxic and full of threats that ended in a deliberate car crash that killed her boyfriend and his friend. Mackenzie Shirilla was convicted in 2023. A judge gave her a life sentence. Shirilla will be in prison for at least the next 15 years for what she did on July 31st, 2022. Then she'll be eligible for parole. Mackenzie accelerated her car to 100 miles per hour on purpose and crashed it into a wall, killing her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and 19-year-old Davion Flanagan. A big part of this case was the surveillance video, which showed the car driving slowly, then bolting past a camera at a high rate of speed before crashing into a wall. And you can see in this video just how fast that car was going. It would be several more months until Shirilla would be arrested, and now police are releasing the body cam video of that moment from November 2022. I want to play the full clip for you so you can see the moments that the arresting officer arrived on scene.
Where's she?
Right back there, pal.
Hi, Mackenzie. Step out for me. I'm Detective Jesus. I'm the one who's been investigating the crash. You're under arrest for aggravated murder ×2, okay? Nobody's gonna ask you any questions. Nobody's gonna bother you. Can I have your key, please?
Could you please be careful taking this one off so it doesn't break the bracelet, please?
You got it. You got it.
Do you want my glasses?
No.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay, just keep your hands right here. I'm not gonna tighten these, okay? I don't want to hurt you. You good? Are they good? Thank you. All right. This screws are right here.
Actually, he took her out of the car and we did not.
Okay. Do you have anything out of your pockets, anything like that? We're gonna watch your head going in.
The moment that's catching a lot of people's attention is how Shirilla asks that the handcuffs not break her bracelet. Police also released this body cam video, a clip showing Shirilla in the back seat of a squad car riding to the police station. She's alone, realizing that she was charged with the murder of 2 people. A big part of this case, especially when it got to trial, was the argument that Shirilla never showed any remorse for what happened. Part of her defense was that she didn't remember the crash. Here's what Mackenzie said in her victim impact statement.
The families of Dom and Davion, I'm so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Davion. We were all friends and Dom was my soulmate. I wish I could take all your pain away, and I'm so sorry. And to my family, thank you for the support and all the love you guys give. Thank you for fighting with me. I love you all so much.
I want to thank Upside for sponsoring this body cam. Upside is a free app that gets you real cash back for everyday essentials like groceries and gas. Now, I'm new to Law&Crime. All my new coworkers were telling me to download Upside and give it a try, so I did. I went to a gas station about 4 minutes from my house, downloaded the app. I got 52 cents back per gallon. That was a total of $7 back, filling up my tank. That money will appear in my Upside app, and then I can transfer it to my bank account. It's an app that really works. Once you have the Upside app, you can claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using your debit or credit card and follow the steps on the app and get paid. Now, as you just saw me do, you can use Upside at gas stations like Shell, Exxon, Mobil, 7-Eleven, and that's just naming a few. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description or scan this QR code and use our promo code BODYCAM. That will get you an extra 25 cents back on every gallon in your first tank of gas. In the months after the crash, Shirilla went to a concert in a wheelchair as she was recovering from her injuries. And in her mom's victim impact statement, she tried to argue that she went to that concert in the victim's honor. But you can hear the judge wasn't buying it.
That was for Dom. Everything she did after the accident was either in honor of him, to be close to him, or just to be by him any way that she can. She's like devastated and tragic. He was the air that she breathes, okay? And they went with his cousin. We spent all kinds of time with him after the accident. What was the other thing?
I'm hearing an awful lot about your daughter. I'm not hearing very much about the two dead people.
Dominic, okay? I'm asking you for leniency because this was a tragic accident that she does not remember. And Davion, he's a new friend. And I'm so sorry.
What does that mean? His life is worthless?
No.
Okay.
God, no, not at all. They all loved each other. They all spent every day together. You know what I mean? I don't know
And
too
isn't
much
that
for
part
him.
of the problem, Mrs. Shirilla?
Sorry?
Isn't that part of the problem, that they all trusted each other? Isn't that part of...
It's not a problem at all. It was
It's a
wonderful.
problem how they all ended up in the car together and two of them ended up dead.
Then it was the judge's turn to speak.
There's only one person who's responsible for the pain of everyone in this room, and that person is you, Mackenzie. Nobody else is responsible. This isn't the fault of Dominic's family or Davion's family or your family. And I know that each of you have asked your questions to yourselves, what if? What if I had done this or that? The truth of it is, none of us can control the intentions of another. And when there is a purposeful intent to harm or kill someone, it is the perpetrator alone who bears the responsibility for the choice and the consequences and the harm that follows. The difficulty for sentencing today, honestly, is whether or not I believe you should get consecutive sentences. I'm troubled that should I give you a concurrent sentence, that people will believe that somehow I'm being disrespectful to one of the victims. And on the other hand, I have to weigh the punishment. There's a very good likelihood, Mackenzie, that you will spend the rest of your life in prison. That won't be up to me. That will be up to the parole board, and that will be up to you to a great extent. I understand that the pain in this room wants me to impose the harshest sentence, but I don't believe that would be the appropriate sentence, because I do believe that Mackenzie will not be out in 15 years.
Joining us now is retired Judge Fanon Rucker. Judge, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. You see this body cam video. What stands out to you?
Well, the body cam footage that we're seeing now is, and I've heard it described in so many instances as bizarre. This young lady, 17 years old, had just crashed a car 100 miles an hour and is now in custody. Didn't sound like she had any prior criminal history or engagement with police officers. And her first statement, it looks like her first statement is, hey, with these handcuffs, could you be careful so you don't break my bracelet?
Yeah.
Wow. What's the reaction? Young lady, do you realize what's going on here? That's the first thought that comes in my mind. The second thought, and it's more of a practical consideration. I'm a plaintiff's attorney now, and I was a judge for many years, a prosecutor. As humans, we experience things that we're not used to experiencing. In our bodies, our minds, our thoughts, we go into shock. And it takes some time for us to process and return to some amount of normalcy. And what I see in that video is someone who most likely was in shock, even though her behavior after the fact suggests there may be some other irregularities in her behaviors as well.
Because a big part of her defense was that she didn't remember what happened. And then the prosecution standpoint was she has shown no remorse for taking the lives of these two people in this deliberate car crash. And then to see it play out with her talking about this bracelet. And you've been on the bench throughout your career. You have dealt with people who have been accused now in your current work, people who have been accused of difficult crimes. I mean, how common is it that, because certainly for me, if I was told that I was going to be charged with 2 counts of murder, I'd be beside myself. But to actually be in that place where it just doesn't seem like it really registered with her at all.
Yeah, it really does raise questions about her mental health, mental health wellness, her mental health acumen. What we do know, this is a 17-year-old child at the time. She was 17 years old, and I don't want to in any way denigrate or reduce her responsibility, but we have to recognize that she was a minor. Now, they bound her over as an adult appropriately because of the heinous nature of the crime and the investigation that revealed that this was deliberate and that she didn't not only brake near the time that this crash happened, but that the pedal was pushed all the way down to the floor at 100 miles an hour when this crash happened. So there was something going on intentional about her conduct, but ultimately she was clearly having difficulties processing her life in that moment, in the moments in the crash and the moments after the crash when the officers stopped her. This was not what anyone, I think, who watched it can and would consider normal behavior. But what's normal behavior under these circumstances?
Yeah, certainly so. And seeing this video this week was an opportunity to go back to this trial from 2023. And one of her key parts of defense was, I don't remember this happening. In the legal community, what do you need to show in court when you're making that type of argument that I just blacked out, I didn't see it, where it actually can hold some water when you're trying to get a not guilty verdict for killing 2 people?
Yeah. So when we talk about statements from people suggesting that perhaps if they did commit a crime, they committed it by reason of insanity, they're not guilty by reason of insanity, or somehow they're not competent to move forward in trial. The ultimate question for a defendant in Ohio, when they are accused of committing some offense and their later statement is, well, I was just so out of my mind, I had no intention of doing this. The question becomes, at the time of the commission of the offense, was the person so dispossessed of their mental faculties that they neither understood what they were doing nor appreciated the consequences of their actions? Now, I wasn't part of the defense team, so I don't know what evaluations were made to determine that she was, in fact, competent to stand trial and that this was not a substantial basis to argue that there was, in fact, not guilty by reason of insanity. But ultimately, the fact that someone claims, well, I blacked out, I didn't know what happened. There was a whole lot that happened before you blacked out and a whole lot that happened after you blacked out. And what we have with technology in these days is all of the abilities to go back through cell phones and go back through body cam footage and go back through sky cams and everything else to track people's movements, their actions, their buying, their purchases, their searches on the internet, and all those kind of things, which can help to give a clearer picture of what someone was doing and what they were thinking to counter their argument that, well, I just don't know what happened here. Wow, did I do that? Well, yeah, and here's all of the hundreds of hours of video camera footage to show you all those things you did up to that time.
Yeah, and that surveillance video of the car as it speeds up to 100 miles per hour, it just sticks with you when you think back to this case. She ends up getting a life sentence, but she does have the possibility for parole in 15 years. What will go into the decision by the parole board now 13 years from where we're speaking right now to decide whether or not she would get out early?
Yep. Life with the possibility of parole after 15. The parole boards in Ohio and most other states, I actually used to work for the parole board in Indiana before going to law school. What they look for when evaluating whether to grant parole to an individual who is incarcerated, a lot of it has to do with what has changed about the person's life, their thoughts, or how they perceive the crime that was committed that led them in prison in the first place. What we see when people are denied parole many times is their refusal or an inability to accept responsibility for their actions. And we see that quite often. They may say they do, but the parole board's job is to engage in some introspection through questioning and through some investigation to determine whether a person is actually filled with sorrow or guilt about what they did, or if they're just saying what they need to say in order to be relieved of the rest of their jail sentence. The other thing that parole is looking for is, what are you doing behind bars to make yourself what we consider in society a better person than you were before you went to prison? Have you been taking classes? Have you been engaging in confrontation with other prisoners? How are you getting along? Again, they look at the totality of the person, not only for what they're doing in prison, but more importantly, how they have received the consequences or accepting responsibility for what ultimately brought them there. And as the judge said at sentencing, she's doubtful that the parole board is ultimately going to grant this young lady parole, because she, in her appearance and in her positioning with the court, at least in 2023, did not exhibit any level of remorse or responsibility that suggests to the judge that that's going to allow her to be released when she's up for parole, at least that first time in 15 years.
Yeah, in 15 years from now, you have this body cam video. Will the parole board look back at it and see that this was a moment where she was not concerned about being charged with 2 counts of murder, was more concerned with the bracelet, and then her victim impact statement, it felt like it was roughly a minute long. She thanked her family, briefly said that she was sorry for what happened. Does that evidence prior to the verdict have an impact on whether or not someone could be granted parole?
Well, of course it does, because it's all about painting the picture. The parole board members who are going to review this case most likely weren't there in court at the time that this happened. Most likely none of the parole board members were part of the prosecution team, or even part of the defense team, or part of the jailers team that actually was responsible for making sure that she was properly incarcerated. So it will require a full painting of the picture of what led her to actually be incarcerated. So yes, they will most likely review all of that. But what's also important, and we hear about it every once in a while when a certain offender is up for parole in a highly publicized case, the prosecutor's office will make every effort, and they'll usually commit to the families in certain cases, that every time this person shows up for parole, the prosecutor's office will be there to object to it, and will collect letters, and will ask for statements from the family, and will present just that type of damning evidence to that parole board to accentuate the fact that they don't believe that this person should be released. And I just have to believe that even though the father in this case said, I'm not looking for such a harsh sentence for this young lady, have to believe that at the time that she's up for parole, this will be reviewed by the prosecutor's office, and just those facts and how tragic and traumatic this was to this family and to the community, that they will be there to object to her release unless she shows some drastic, dramatic, overwhelming change in her character and in her acceptance of responsibility for this very, very sad affair.
The judge said that she was wrestling with, do you do concurrent sentences, or are they, because these are 2 life sentences, 2 people were murdered, or are they sentences that one and then the other? Certainly you have this 15-year parole period. What do you make of this sentence? Was this the right decision?
Well, certainly. And Judge Russo is an extremely experienced jurist. She has handled many cases like this. Her observation of what occurred here through these facts, and determining that this was appropriate for a concurrent, meaning you have concurrent versus consecutive. Consecutive means if I give you a life, you got this life, and then once that life sentence is done, you got another life to do after that life. Here, she said it's a concurrent sentence, which means it's all served at the same time. I think it was very appropriate. This was part of a single act. It is horribly tragic that the young man who was in the back seat, who happened to be a friend of her boyfriend's, and of course they had a horrible relationship, was what it appears from witnesses and from the evidence that was presented. She and her boyfriend had a very rough go at it. But this young man who was in the back seat was really an innocent bystander who had nothing to do with the conflict that was going on between the two of them, and yet his family is grieving his loss. But is the life sentence running concurrent appropriate? Certainly the law supports it. And I don't think there's anything that I see that contradicts that was in fact the right decision made by Judge Russo here.
Since you've spent part of your career on the bench, I want you to take us inside victim impact statements and how that process plays out, because you have Mackenzie gives this very brief victim impact statement that she read off a piece of paper. Her attorney defended her. The judge sparred a bit with Mackenzie's mom, saying that she wasn't focused enough on talking about the victims in this case. And then the judge gives a very damning pre-written victim impact statement, kind of responding to everything she heard. How often can what a defendant says in that moment actually have an impact on what the judge decides the punishment is going to be?
So as a judge, the way that I handled my cases, once a person was found guilty and were going to be sentenced, I would give their attorney the opportunity to make a statement first. And then I would give the prosecution the opportunity to present any evidence, testimony, statements, photographs, any information they'd like to present for me to help to consider an appropriate sentence. And it would be during that time that the victim's family or the victims would testify, that any officers, community groups, any interested parties that were in touch with the prosecutor at that time, they would have the ability to offer their position. And then the last one that I would give the opportunity to be heard before I ultimately made my decision was the defendant, the person who was the subject of the case, the person who had been found guilty of intentionally or grossly in a negligent way committing some crime that now requires some level of punishment or consequences. They would be the last ones to address the court. And besides that, they will have had the opportunity, because of the Sixth Amendment right to confrontation, to have heard all of the other stuff that have been presented against them up to that time. The victim impact statement, and you had asked about that actually is a very specific vehicle that asks the question of the victims, hey, tell me how this has changed your life. What has this done to you? How do you feel? Do you have any recommendations about how this should be handled? Now, victims do have a right under Marsy's law in Ohio to actually show up to court and to be heard on the record. But a lot of times they just don't have the confidence. They don't have the emotional ability to stand before the court and stand before media to make those statements. And so the written record in one's quiet room during a time of contemplation can be extremely useful and powerful in being read in court, either by the person or by someone on their behalf. And so that's the actual victim impact statement. The defendant's statement is not part of the victim impact statement. It's really just part of the defendant's offering of their thoughts, their position. It's called mitigation. Is there anything to help mitigate the consequences of what the court is going to do here? And I would yield a whole lot to what the defendant had to say. When I say I yield, I would really be listening for that acceptance of responsibility, that contrite apology, that level of guilt that says, I messed up here. Not, look, I know I didn't do anything wrong. Let's just get on with this thing. Or, as we see in some very weird and really sad cases, the defendant laughing, smiling, not taking it seriously, blowing kisses. In one instance, I saw a defendant who was being sentenced for murder, blowing kisses at the widow of the person he had killed. I mean, those are all parts of that mitigation process. But we take, as judges, we take that into very serious consideration in helping us decide what sentence will be appropriate.
Yeah, this is certainly a very tragic case, this body cam video, allowing us to revisit it once again and shed a little bit more light of what took place back in 2022. Retired Judge Fanon Rucker, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Very glad to be here. You have a wonderful day.
Again, Shirilla was handed a life sentence with the possibility of being released on parole in 15 years. But from what you heard from the judge, she believes that it's going to be unlikely that she'll get out that early. We want to hear what you have to say about this newly released body cam video. Leave your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for joining us for Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.